I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Hasta la vista, baby.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Broken English podcast. You're here with Bola and Hugo. Both of us have caffeine because apparently that's what we rely upon. I'm doing the branding as always. Bola's doing the branding sometimes, but he tends to like his local coffee shops, and I tend to like my free coffee.
Well, it's not free unless you have farmed it yourself.
Technically, well, I mean, it's free to me because there's a promotion going on at a gas station. You just show your loyalty card at the gas station, you get your free coffee.
Now there comes the question now that you're tasting coffee. If you're from a gas station coffee.
I mean, I'm not talking about quality here. I'm not alluding to quality. There is no quality.
Right.
It's just caffeine flavored water.
Oh, right. That's all you need. That's all.
It's dependency, you know. We all have our addictions.
There might be gasoline in that, just to let you know. That's why it's free. It's runoffs. It's just a runoff.
If it works, it works. If it works, it works.
Don't drink it near open flames. That'll just warn you.
Speaking of which.
Speaking of which, today I want to talk about underrated movies.
Right.
Underrated movies. Because in my lifespan, with my long lifespan, I've seen a lot of movies come and go where, you typically have your movies that go in and they're all completely forgettable. But once in a while, as probably many of us have observed or experienced, that something comes along and it's like it didn't seem to get the respect or the attention it deserved or the recognition it deserved, right? Like it should have been a bigger movie. Now this happens for an assortment of reasons, right? That you can get into. But there's just been a lot of movies over the probably since the inception of film, right, that have just come along and then they just really didn't get the glamour they should have deserved.
And do any in particular stand out for you?
There's a few that stand out to me. I mean, where would I start? We could go back into the past here, and I have a list here. For example, just recently, Blade Runner 2049. I thought that movie was it just seemed to have the same fate as the original movie had, where it was just this. It seemed like it had a cult following, but it just never really. I believe both of them were box office flops, right? Mm-hmm. I never watched the original. Well, the thing is, I did watch the original Blade Runner, but I was obviously too young to see it when it came out. So I don't know what was it like at that time. But I mean, I was there for when it for the sequel, and I'm not saying I was the biggest Blade Runner fan to begin with, right? I love science fiction. That definitely got me to go see it because I love science fiction. And I thought the original was decent. I know that might be sacrilegious to some people who are listening. I mean, it was the original was enjoyable, but I really loved the sequel with Ryan Gosling. I think it was I can probably say it was a masterpiece, but as we know, it technically was a flop. And to me, it was surprising, and I just didn't get why. I mean, I have my own theories in terms of why it didn't get the recognition in the box office that I think it should have deserved. Did you see it?
I didn't. I saw some of them.
Oh, you saw? Okay.
Again, I saw it. I would have been tired or whatever when I saw it, and I didn't end up seeing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like you, I saw the original, but I saw the original within the past 5 years. And if anyone's listening to this in 2019, the past 5 years would have been 2015 through 2020. The film itself, I believe, came out in the 70s, maybe the 80s.
I think it was the 80s. It was the late 80s or mid 80s?
Yeah, 80s actually.
Yeah.
Came out in the 80s. I think it may have been the earlier end of it. Well, who knows?
It was somewhere in the 80s, yeah.
And I remember because, of course, Ridley Scott had a great decade there with Alien
Yeah.
and all these other films.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, when I saw Blade Runner, I saw it at the worst possible point, as in the original, because I saw it after all the hype. And the problem with seeing it after all the hype. And the problem with seeing a film after all the hype is you go into it with the expectation of this is going to be amazing. That's why I don't like, if someone tells me a film is good, great, but I don't want to be bombarded with it, because then you will set it up too high. Like, for example, you told me that the Joker was amazing, and so when I went in and I first saw it, I was like, oh no, this is good, but it's not amazing. And then I saw it a second time and I realized, actually, you know what, Bola, you were right. It was fucking great.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, the second time I much preferred it.
Right.
The second time I preferred it because my expectations didn't exist, because I'd seen it. When I saw it the second time, I looked at it from more of an analytical stance of, what's this like as a film? How's the acting? How's this, that, and the third? I really didn't go in with the pressure that I did with the viewing when I first saw it.
Right.
But I digress. Basically, with regards to the reason that films like the current Blade Runner and films of its ilk seem to be flopping are because we really don't tend to have the audiences performing like they should. Because it seems like there's now a very different division in film audiences, whereby you have your Netflix crowd who want a specific type of film or a specific type of convenience, or primarily, and there are exceptions, but primarily you have people that go to the cinema that want to see a specific form of cookie cutter theatrical explosion film.
Right.
Maybe superheroes are involved. And Blade Runner, while it had the idea of being grandiose, visually interesting, and all these other things, it seemed like, in my opinion, for some people, it would be more of a thought-provoking 2.5 hours, however long it was, rather than just, I'll go there and then forget about it 5 minutes later.
Right. I think you did touch a point. I think one of the reasons for one of my leading theories is why it didn't do as well as the box office wise was that it just wasn't your typical, blow 'em up kind of cookie cutter production, right? It was something that was supposed to be a little bit more thought provoking and deeper. So it didn't have the same pace as like a superhero flick or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it just didn't, that because of that, it doesn't bring out the same amount of numbers or the same amount of people as you would for, an Avengers film.
But I think what's happening, though, is with referring to it as a flop, we're kind of taking away from the idea of what your original premise was of if it's underrated or not.
Right.
Because we're marrying the two of commercial success and of quality, and it's not the same thing, as we both know.
So why
do you think,
when I say underrated, I just mean it's kind of like you can put it into two kind of categories: box office performance and let's just say audience exception of it or something like that. It's just, so this is just one aspect of it, right? Where this one, it's like, I know it was really critically, it was reviewed well, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was critically, but it's just for box office, it just didn't do well.
Right. I'm just going to quickly check here to see how it was on IMDb, because I don't remember it getting... I remember a lot of people saying it was a letdown.
Now, I guess...
I myself haven't seen it, as I say.
Yeah. I would wonder what the people who thought it was a letdown, where they were coming from, right? Were they fans of the original... That kind of thing.
Well, apparently, it is getting a good amount of reviews. Like on IMDb, it's got an 8 out of 10. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Denis Villeneuve. Yeah. He always comes out with quality.
It was quality. I mean, like I was telling you, it's just everything about it I liked. But I recognized watching it, it's I call it a slow burn.
Right.
It's not an action piece every 5 or 10 minutes, right? It's kind of it's I wouldn't compare it to The Godfather, but it's not something that's supposed to be some sort of spectacle, action packed, one action scene to the other with all these cookie cutter characters and motifs and cliches and things like that. It's just moves at a certain pace, and I think that might be it's meant to be more of art than spectacle.
So
That's
what
how
is
I
it
felt
that
about
you?
it.
But why would you call it underrated?
Underrated that it's for box office reasons, and then second of all, it's like the reception to it. Just in terms of the reception to it, I don't know if this is gonna go down as another cult classic,
Mm-hmm.
or what the general what would I say? It's hard to know what the general consensus is gonna be with this film, but I just felt, for me, based on everything I've seen about it, that it was might have not have gotten the let's say the respect it deserved, because I thought it was a really great movie that warranted for me to watch it more than once.
Fantastic. And then you got involved in the comics and all.
Yeah, just like
Yeah.
that was just like a spur of the moment kind of thing, and I just saw it. I'm like, oh, there's another comic canon to this, so I was curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's just like, well, for example, maybe, I don't know. This one might be a little bit controversial too, but it's like, let's. Have you seen Office Space?
I have, yes.
Yeah. Now that one probably could be considered a probably a cult classic, right? But it's
Right.
a great movie, right? That should have been
Right.
more mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, you find that there are lots of films that do tend to get their traction later on down the road, and that's one of the beauties of film, that you can have something that comes out and it not get any recognition, and then 30 years later, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
everyone loves it. I mean, I myself, I like Office Space. It's not for me as big as other people find it, but to
Oh,
each
man.
their own.
It's
As I say,
it's like one of those
it's
movies
interesting how things.
quote from constantly and pull from
Yeah, no,
constantly.
that's not one for me necessarily to quote from, but it was definitely an enjoyable film. The one I did see recently, which I don't know if you've seen or not, is Roadhouse. You ever seen that one?
The original?
Yeah, well, I didn't know there was a remake.
Wait, Road the one with Patrick Swayze? The one with Patrick
Yeah,
Swayze?
yeah.
Yeah, I
You
think
seen that?
I think there might have been, or maybe I'm confusing it with something else. Don't quote me on it. I may be wrong about that, if there was a remake to it or there's maybe talk about it. But yeah, you're talking about. Actually, I haven't seen Roadhouse.
It's actually not bad.
Is it?
Like, there are cheesy aspects to it, um, but it really does have an allure, and it has an appeal, and you've got over the top characters and all of that, and a few exaggerations and some cheesy moments. Well, as I just said, cheesy moments. But I went into it thinking, all right, we've all seen Family Guy. We all know that occasionally Peter Griffin references Roadhouse just randomly.
Roadhouse when
Yeah, precisely.
when he
What's
spanking
that from?
somebody.
Precisely.
Right.
So where does that stem from? And why is that referenced in that film? And it's actually all right. With that said, though, I think it was just last night, my girlfriend put on Grease. I didn't want to watch it. Don't have a problem with people enjoying musicals. Everything's, people can like whatever they want. And I think I enjoyed it definitely pre-teens, probably pre-10. So, like, I was 7 or 8 or something like that. And Mum took us to see it as a play and such. So I liked it then to a degree.
Right.
But as an adult watching the film, it's a little bit over the top. And you've got, maybe I'm wrong on that age, but you've got people in their 30s playing teenagers.
Right. What?
It's one of those
Just
that-
to go back to Roadhouse, what is that movie about? I can't.
Essentially, what it's about is a bouncer. So there's a bouncer, Patrick Swayze, who is the bouncer. He's a cooler, right?
Yeah.
And what a cooler basically is the bouncer that leads the bouncers and tries to cool things because we don't want this to escalate. So I'm going to keep it cool. So it starts off with him in one particular bar, and then he gets poached to a much more ruffian-based one where everything's much more nefarious and people are more violent in another town. And then it tells the story as it goes into the next town with his life continuing over there. And it's actually all right.
That's it. That's an interesting premise there. Honestly, all I know is some bits and pieces of it, and yeah, the Family Guy bit.
Yeah, I never knew anything about that until I saw it. Now that I've seen it, I actually think it's not bad.
When did you see it for the first time?
2 weeks ago.
Oh, so it just is just fresh.
Very, very recent.
Interesting. Now, another one that comes to my mind is Equilibrium with Christian Bale.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
See, this is the thing. It's just one. It's one of those films that's like when I started getting into filmmaking, it was just one of those sci-fi films that I was like, man, and I think it just came out before The Matrix came out, and it's basically to give people the idea what the film is about. It's basically about this dystopian future where everybody's emotions have been removed by this drug that's administered by the government, Prosium as it was called, right? And Christian Bale plays this guy named, I think he was John Preston. He's one of the enforcers of the society, and basically, through a series of events, he stops taking the medication and then starts to develop emotions, and then he just starts to rebel against the authorities. It's very, very 1984. I mean, it's like it's unapologetically based on 1984 and A Brave New World. But I think it was just, I really, really enjoyed it. And it had some really interesting action in it too, where it had this kind of style of action where the director makes guns with karate or martial art, and they called it gun kata, right? But it was that, and I just really generally enjoyed the story. Now, like I said, this film went completely under the radar, and it kind of developed a little cult following to it. And the reason, like I said, the reason I think it just didn't do well is because I believe it just came out, I think it was shortly before The Matrix or shortly just after it. And it just it just went under the radar. And it kind of, maybe they had a similar feel to it.
Yeah, that's one I haven't seen. I heard a lot about another film that came out that also has a cult following that I couldn't get into, that I tried to watch last night. I don't know if you've seen Constantine or not.
Oh, Constantine.
Have you seen that?
I love that movie.
I think I saw about 8 or 10 minutes of it last night, and as we've discussed before,
right,
if it doesn't grab me, I'm like, all right.
You know what? I think here's the thing about films, right? And I had this epiphany the other day. It's like, obviously, not every. I think this is going to be a revolutionary take right now. I think I'm onto something.
All right, Trump.
Revolutionary.
All right, Trump.
It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge.
Some people are saying.
Obviously, as we've noticed, not everything is everybody's cup of tea, right? Mm-hmm. Not everybody likes sci-fi. Not everybody likes romantic comedies, right? So we have to keep in mind that when making films or watching films, there's a specific audience that this film is trying to entertain, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Now, Constantine is a fine example of that, right? I love that kind of topic about, like, spirituality and demons and angels and that whole thing, right? So if you're just not really into that subject, the film just probably wouldn't work for you. So I can understand that, but I remember watching it and I loved it. I even bought the DVD for it.
Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, another person I know, my girlfriend, whose birthday is August 30th, ironically, and I also know someone else with that birthday. I won't name names, but that person loved it. She loved it,
She's got good taste.
and well,
I think they're talking about a sequel or a TV show.
they're always talking about sequels.
Or I think
They're
there's a
always
TV
talking about
shows being made or a sequel.
What I find interesting is the fact that they're talking about remaking well, not they're talking about. I think they've greenlit The Exorcist.
Didn't they make a remake to that?
They made an Exorcist television show.
I could have
I think
swore
they're
they
making
made
a
it.
movie remake.
I'm so lost in it. I thought they already even did that.
I'm not sure that they did. I think
could-
they may
I
have
could
made
be
a sequel,
totally
but I
wrong.
don't
It's just
think
like-
that they made a remake.
You know what? Just to let everybody know, I think I just assume everything has already been remade, and I've just missed.
No,
out
they
on-
made sequels. They did not make a remake yet.
Right. Maybe I'm confusing it with Doctor Sleep. With The Shining.
Did you see Doctor Sleep?
No, I didn't see it yet.
Was not The Shining.
I would not imagine it.
Was not The Shining.
But didn't you like it?
Doctor Sleep?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I thought it was you that I was talking to that said they loved it.
No, I have taste.
Oh, wow. Did you see it though?
Yeah.
Oh.
The Shining I love.
I thought it was you
Dr.
that told me
Sleep?
they loved Doctor Sleep.
No, it definitely wasn't me. I'm a fan of Ewan McGregor, who's the lead in it.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of him, but the film did not do it for me. And I was looking forward to it as well.
Well, I kind of just I poo-pooed it because it's just like, you know how I feel with remakes and reboots, right?
Well, this wasn't a remake or reboot. This was a sequel
sequel.
based on a sequel novel.
Right.
So this was Stephen King wrote a book called Doctor Sleep as well.
Oh, okay. So this was actually
Yeah.
so this was actually based on a sequel to The Shining, the book.
I believe so, yes.
I see. Okay. Well, maybe I confused you with somebody else. But you know, it's funny that you bring up Constantine because that's one of those films too that I thought it was underrated.
Yeah, I'm not part of that club.
But you saw the whole thing through.
No.
No, you didn't.
You know me. You know me.
Jesus Christ. So you didn't see the whole thing through. Maybe
I'm very
you know,
busy. I've got stuff to do.
You know what? For the first 10 minutes, I wasn't into the Joker.
Wow.
I'll be honest
Okay,
with you.
well-
The first 10 or 15 minutes, I wasn't feeling it, and then it just at a certain point, then I got into it.
There are films like that where there is a very slow burn, and I appreciate that, but I think I've become accustomed to the modern model of film where they have something grab you within the first 10 minutes, and that's kind of the golden rule of screenplays as well, within the first 10 pages, they say.
Yeah.
And as a result, it means you want someone to care as soon as possible, because if they care, they'll ride out with it. But if they don't care, then it's going to be more of a chore for them. Whereas if you look at films that were made sort of 80s and pre-80s, those sorts of films would be over 2 hours, maybe 3 hours in length. And it would be, as you said, a much slower burn where you would have to get more involved.
Yeah. I know. I mean, the thing is, it would be nice to have the audience in the first minute, right? But because of the nature of this art form, right, or any art form, it's subjective,
Right.
So you may not. I mean, as with any film, you may never have the person watching it, but the person next to them, it might be different.
Of course. As I say, it might be a really good film. Maybe I'll go back to it.
But yeah, I know what you mean though. But I know what you mean. For me, it's like I can just tell if the film hasn't grabbed me within the first, I would say maximum 20 minutes. Right. Rarely. It's very, very rarely that it's going to grab me after that. Because I do believe, yeah, if you don't have the person within the first 20 minutes, even that's pushing it, it's like, you probably don't have them at all. You're probably not going to get them at that point.
I mean, the idea is we all have or the majority of us, have so little time to waste. We've got so many things going on, infinite distractions, infinite obligations, so on and so forth. And so when a story is told, there has to be a thread, there has to be a nugget. And if it grips you, then you're going to stay there and you're going to be committed for the whole thing.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then it does tend to be a chore. I'm sure you've had this experience with television shows as well. You watch the first episode, you watch the pilot, and you're just like, eh.
Yeah.
And it's lucky that they have you continue to the next episode if that's the case. Like, for example, The Sopranos. I was not into the first episode.
Right.
The second episode, as you just said, the second episode grabbed me and hooked me, and then I was in.
Yeah.
But that's, we're talking, that's going to be at least 70 minutes of my time before I start to get interested.
TV shows is a bit different because I've had that before too, where I've watched, there's shows that I've loved too. And then, for some reason, I probably didn't even I wasn't really, really into it until like maybe the third episode or something like that. And it's a miracle I even got it that far. Because if it's like 2 episodes in and it's like, this is not getting me, it's usually I'm out.
And you're not starved for choice, and that's the problem.
No, there's definitely a lot of choices out there, as we see.
And the thing about certain older TV shows, and the reason why they were so successful, is because you didn't really have much of a choice. So it'd be like, okay, you got limited amount of channels, you got to choose something, and then you'll stick with it. When you have hundreds of channels, and God knows how many unwatchable hours of content.
Unwatchable being choices. Like unwatchable because you just don't have the time, or it's just unwatchable because it's just crap.
Well, I meant the time, but both could apply.
Right.
But you have choice, and that means if things aren't up to par, there's no reason why I can't just change the channel or stream a different particular movie or show because you're not entertaining me. And that entertainment could be of any form, and like you said, perspectives are individual.
Yeah.
Everything is subjective with regards to what you do or don't like. No one's wrong or right, apart from, of course, myself or you. We are the only ones that are right. But by and large,
the name of the podcast should be.
Yeah, shouldn't have called it Broken English Films. Should have called it The Always Right People. We're gonna stop this.
Don't worry, we'll figure it out later.
I think we're good with the brand as is.
But but it's just kind of, it for you, was there a film that you've seen that you felt that just did not get, like, that really bothered you, that it didn't get the accolation and maybe the box office dollars that it should have, and it just kind of really left you scratching your head?
Yes, there are hundreds of indie films that come under that banner,
right,
and hundreds of foreign films that come under that banner for me. Just an absolutely innumerable amount. I suppose in terms of the box office draw, where all the ducks were in the road but it didn't end up taking flight, would be Stardust, which I've mentioned, I think, on the podcast before, which I don't know if you've seen or not yet.
No.
So Stardust was released in 2007, and it was based off of, I believe, a Neil Gaiman book. And it had big names in it, had De Niro, had Michelle Pfeiffer, had Ricky Gervais, had a bunch of people, reputable people. And it was kind of a fantasy, it wasn't kind of a fantasy, it was a fantasy tale done excellently, great humor, great acting, great everything. It looked fantastic.
Right.
And it went nowhere.
Right.
Again, critically acclaimed, and had all the things, had all the building blocks which should have added up to box office success.
Right.
But it didn't.
It just didn't. Why do you think that was?
For that particular film, I think it had to do with what felt like a lack of marketing.
Interesting. A lack of marketing.
Because the thing is, if you don't have enough people see the trailer, if you don't have enough people see the poster, then yes, you can rely on the star power associated with it. But it's harder like any product. If you want to sell a product, people need to know about the product.
Yeah. I think actually you make a good point, because I think some of these films that come to my mind, most of them, or if not, I mean a lot of them, if not most of them, I think were victim to just not that great marketing, or just the lack of marketing. Like when I mentioned Equilibrium, right? It's just like when I think back about it, it's like, yeah, I hardly ever remember seeing a trailer for that. I don't even know what even compelled me to even watch the film in the first place.
I do remember before he became big, I remember when I first fell in love with Christopher Nolan's work, and it was Memento.
Yeah, Memento was great.
Because Memento I saw in the theater randomly.
Oh, really?
Absolutely randomly. I forget whether I was working in a movie theater at the time or not. I think I may have been, or maybe I was just inspired to go see the film. But it was one of those things where I find there's nothing more appealing than seeing a film in theaters that you know nothing about.
I love that too. if I was living in a movie theater, that would be the thing. I would just randomly walk into just films, especially the ones I have no idea about.
Well, I had a friend of mine recently ask me the premise for Tenet.
Yeah.
And I went, watch it. Just watch the film. They'll tell you the premise within the film.
Right.
You will find it all out as you're watching it.
Here's the thing about Tenet. It's like, I don't even really know what it's ultimately about, right? But that's good, because I don't want to know too much about a film going into it. I just want to get a little sample. Give me the trailer. Just, entice me with it, and just don't reveal too much, because I want to go in there not knowing as much as possible. I just need to get, it's like choosing a book based off its cover, I guess, right? Maybe. Mm-hmm. It's something like that. I just don't want, for movies, right? I just like to go in there not knowing anything, or just not knowing too much about it, because it just ruins a lot of the surprise and the magic.
I like to know I'm the same. I like to know as little as possible. I like to go into it and see what it does for me. We're not being paid for that.
I just thought if I could join in Michael Bublé.
Yeah, I like to see what a film does. And it's up to the film to perform.
Memento was one of those films that I picked up when I was my brief stint in film school. Yeah, that's an episode in itself. But it was my brief stint at the film school, and somebody told me to watch it, so I rented it from the library, or the film school library, or whatever it was. And it was like, God damn, that was a film. But I didn't really know too much about it. But I watched it, and I'm like, God damn, that was a film, right? Now that's a premise. I just love those kinds of films where it's like, somebody's being creative here.
Right.
Who'd have thought a movie going backwards would work?
Well, that leads me as well on to Oliver Stone. Now, Oliver Stone recently came out with his memoir. I believe it's called Chasing the Light.
I saw him a couple of years ago here in Vancouver.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Why? What was he promoting?
He's promoting it again, too. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he was promoting this series called Untold Stories of The Untold History of America. And now it's on Netflix, actually.
Really?
Yeah, just recently came out. So it's a documentary with a few episodes, and it's just basically, it's not revisionist, but it just tells you, it kind of goes into the different aspects of American history, and it tells you a different angle about it. So he was here. It was so much. Yeah, I even have a recording of it. There was a Q&A after, but he was promoting it here, and I went to go see him. It was at the Orpheum, or it was a Vogue Theater. I can't remember. But I love Oliver Stone and love documentaries, and I love history. So I was just like, I'm gonna go buy a ticket, and I saw him, and he got to watch maybe was one episode of the documentary. And then there was a Q&A after about it, which was interesting in itself. But yeah. Well, so what were you saying about Oliver Stone?
Well, essentially, the reason why I was bringing up Oliver Stone had to do with the fact that you were revering Memento, and you were revering how well it was done and how unique it was, and the boundary pushing that is associated with that. With Chasing the Light and with his work, he has been talking about how impossible it is today to be able to make a lot of films that he has made. And even back then, when he made films like Platoon and other ones that followed that, he would get financing from foreign countries to be able to do it, because he couldn't get companies in the US to pour money into these stories. Apparently he had a story about Martin Luther King, except it showed MLK in a more rounded form, as in it showed him as being a bit of a womanizer and some other things, and it was an exploration into a person rather than an image of a person, rather than historical reference and all this other stuff. And what he was talking about was the fact that in order to get money locally for a lot of his projects, he had trouble then. He said now it would be impossible for him.
It seems like the whole, and I was watching him talk about that recently too, and I even though I'm still technically outsiders, I don't doubt that. Since then, you've just kind of observed what movies are being financed, who's financing them. And it just seems like from his day to now, it's like a whole different beast, right? It's just a totally different climate, right? Because of this, there's been this consolidation of media companies and a different allocation of capital and the perception of films that, and I think you're going to start seeing this now, where really unique films might get a really hard time getting funded, or really controversial or touchy things.
And I think that's horrible. I think that's horrible.
No, it's terrible.
I think film needs to be like any other art form, organic.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, man, and I'm seeing it. It's just what I see these days, it's not a coincidence that he says something like that, and it's what I'm observing too with a lot of the films that are coming out in the last decade. It's just there's something missing. For a lack of a better term, there just seems to be something missing, and I think one of the big aspects of it is what actually is getting the attention and the money.
Right, and we know what that is.
Right. Well, I mean, I was reading this Washington Post article about one thing, and I know this is going to be a very touchy subject. This could be a whole nother podcast, but the influence of Chinese money in the film industry. And it was basically just showing how a lot of the stuff you've been watching has been pretty much you can sum up as propaganda from the Communist Party. Because you can and some of those films I watched, and I had the exact thought in my mind. I was like, oh my God. Did you watch Transformers? Which one was it? I know you're the biggest Transformers fan, so I'm watching. Did you watch the, I believe it was the fourth one with the dinosaur.
No.
Was it the third one or the fourth one? Fuck. But I just remember in this one, I barely made it through it. But
I barely made it through the first one.
Oh my God.
And I stopped there.
Don't worry, folks. I'm going to edit
this.
My
friends put on the second one. My friends put on the second one, and I'm just like, yeah.
Don't worry, folks. We'll edit this part out. You won't hear that. But it was right around, I believe, was it Age of Extinction? It was the third or fourth one. And I'm watching it, and then like the third act, I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just Chinese propaganda. And it was hard to get through the film at that point, but that last act was just so cringy and I knew before I got a significant amount of its funding from a Chinese film company. Might have even been Tencent or something like that. But I'm watching it, and it's like it's obviously glorifying. It kind of puffs up the Chinese military and the government and everything like that. And it was just, honestly, it was so, I had my eyes in the back of my head for the last 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever it was on it, because it was like, okay, I see what's going on here, Michael. And it was just really uncomfortable. But then again, one can say, I mean, maybe his films have been propaganda for the U.S. military, but that's
But nevertheless,
yeah.
I don't remember the last Michael Bay film I enjoyed.
Come on, you gotta name. You gotta have enjoyed one of them. Bad Boys.
No.
The Rock.
No. Oh, The Rock. Oh, The Rock. Yes.
Come on. Okay.
However-
Finally got you. Got one.
However,
got one
The Rock,
from you. Finally.
But The Rock I saw when I was 14 or 15.
Welcome
or
to The
however
Rock.
old.
Sean Connery.
Yeah, no, Sean Connery, you can't pretend like it's not going to be good automatically. But beyond that, I don't
Nicolas
really remember
Cage
the film.
before he went crazy.
Nicolas Cage, my God.
Yeah. Yeah. But going back to that, I mean, I think that we could. That's another topic in itself too, where it's just like movies and being funded and what's just getting out there. Oliver Stone is just one of those pioneers that I remember. You know, watching JFK, it's one of those movies that's like, I remember watching it and it's like, goddamn, this is a film. I want to be a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, he took a lot of liberties with it, but I still think it was a great, fantastic film.
Right, but I think that was an interesting argument that I'd heard once made by the guy that wrote the Dallas Buyers Club.
Right.
You ever see that film?
No, I didn't get to. I haven't actually watched that one. Matthew McConaughey,
It is I believe Matthew McConaughey won an Oscar for it.
Yeah, you did.
No, I know Jared Leto did for his supporting role. Anyway, the Dallas Buyers Club was based upon a character. I believe it was a Texan.
Yeah.
Dallas, Texas. God, I'm clever. Anyway. Anyway, the scriptwriter of it spent some time with the protagonist of who it's based on.
Mm-hmm.
And people told him afterwards, you know, I'm sorry, but you got this wrong, and you got that wrong, and you got this wrong, and you got that wrong. He said, what are you talking about? They go, well, you've got him in the film wearing a cowboy hat all the time, and wearing this all the time, and speaking like this, and doing like that. And he said, yeah, because when I was around him, he did that. Yeah, but he didn't do that all the time. Okay, well, it's a movie, not a documentary.
Right.
And here's where you need to delineate between the two. If you are doing something like a JFK, or like what Oliver Stone was alluding to with the MLK film, etc., you have the option of artistic liberties in fiction.
Yeah.
It is not a documentary.
Yeah.
And that was the thing he insisted upon with regards to the Dallas Buyers Club.
Well, I think that's like a minor detail when it comes to like what the attire he was wearing, right? But this is the thing about when you're watching a biopic, right? They do take liberties, so you have to watch. And I know this, and I'm very aware of this when I'm watching a biopic, that you have to understand. Don't take this as like a 100% accurate representation of the events and the people, because
that's why they
take a lot of
based
liberties.
on.
It's based on it, but don't treat it as like you don't watch that film and think that was the an accurate depiction, 100% accurate historical depiction of what the events and those people and those characters and the people that were in the event, because they always when it comes to these things, the things are always artistic liberties are taken, right? That modifies the historical accuracy of the actual event. So you have to be very, very mindful when watching these things.
No, you definitely do. But even so, it's a question of how you will digest it and how you'll enjoy it, or what your thoughts are on the film. Things have to be an artistic piece is an artistic piece. One film I did recently see, which wasn't quite a biopic, but it was based on a true story / article, was It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
Oh, the one with based on Mr. Rogers, right?
Yeah, and I didn't grow up in North America, and in England, I don't remember ever seeing Mr. Rogers. Maybe it was aired, maybe it wasn't, who knows.
Yeah.
I didn't see it anyway in my childhood. But I know since coming here, the the following and the love and the appreciation that anyone that grew up within that time period tends to have. A friend of mine approached me and she said to me, you know what, I've never really liked Tom Hanks, which firstly I thought she's crazy for saying such an outlandish comment.
I would have stopped the conversation right there and just...
But then she went, the film I just saw though, which I didn't want to see, which I really loved and I thought he was amazing in, was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And she told me this about 4 or 5 months ago. So I watched the film a couple of nights ago, and it's great.
Right, okay.
It's great. It's based around a person who interviewed him and wrote a very in-depth article where he apparently spent a lot of time with the character, with Mr. Rogers, the actual person. And the film itself is done very, very well.
Right.
And it's a feel-good film. I thoroughly recommend that one.
Okay, I'll check it out. Because I actually am curious about that one. I never, that's not like I never, but I'm not gonna say I'm the biggest. I grew up watching a lot of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I caught it here and there in my childhood, but it wasn't something that I watched regularly. But I was very, very aware of Mr. Rogers in the show, and watched a few maybe episodes. But I'm not gonna say, I was a diehard kind of, watcher.
Right. It's a great film. I was not in any way aware of any of the for my girlfriend watching the show, there were personal things that were associated with it, sort of little bits of nostalgic remake and all the rest of it. That wasn't there for me, but I still felt the film worked and it resonated with me, and I really do sing its praises. It was done well. It's one of those films where, as you were referring to at the top of this, it is definitely an underrated one.
Yeah. So you think it's underrated?
Beneath the radar. Pardon?
You think it's underrated?
Didn't do well. Didn't get the traction that I thought it would.
It had a theatrical release, right?
But it didn't get much traction.
Right. Yeah, I never followed up on how well that movie did, or what traction it did get. But I know there was a lot of promotion for it. I mean, I was very aware of it. But you're saying, what was it critically?
I don't know how it was revered or rejected critically,
And then
but I do know. Pardon?
Speaking of that, I think it goes back to what I was saying about the reviews in general. Because I find that there's a lot of films that have been reviewed, and the reviewer, I think there just seems to be a disconnect with the reviewer and the film, because it's like me going into a film that's so, like, let's say a Princess Barbie film or something like that, that's made for 10-year-old girls, right? Now, I can review a film like that, but what am I reviewing it on, basically? It's not a film that's made for me.
Right, but I think that's where the parameters of a critic come in and the different nuances that there are. So, for example, if I am someone that does review said films, that would have to be your field. So it would have to be, okay, I know the quality of your 10-year-old film or your Barbie film or whatever, and I've seen 100 of them, and I know what works and I know what doesn't. I know what kids like, I know what they don't like. It all depends on what the demographic is. Now, if you're talking about films like what we're talking about here, it's in a lot of ways down to subjectivity, and overall how the plot does or doesn't work cohesively, and then personal preference.
Yeah, it just reminds me, for example, when the forums used to be open on IMDb, right? And you just kind of see, to me, just going through different kinds of films, you just see a lot of the user reviews would be based on, I wouldn't say trolling, but some films were being slammed because you had an influx of people who just hated the subject matter in general, right? Hated the genre, but so they just came in there with them. They just came in there with that kind of energy, right? And pushed the numbers down just based on their inherent negativity to this genre.
I think that's why people like Roger Ebert and Leonard Maltin and these other people who are A.O. Scott, who are very much revered critics. I think that's why there should be a delineation between the profession of critiquing and your run-of-the-mill opinions like assholes, because everyone's got one.
Yeah.
And everyone has an opinion on whatever film, be they right or wrong. But if you look at the majority of revered critics or reputable ones that work for a publication that actually takes pride in someone doing a good job, where it's not just sort of like, all right, write the first thing you think about this, but it's actually take the time to consider what you've seen, what you've experienced, see what worked, see what didn't work, etc., etc., etc. I think there's something to be said for that, and I think there's some praise to be given. And when you do leave the floodgates open for everyone to voice their opinion, you will get, as you say, the trolls. You'll get the people that go, I don't like his face, so I'm going to comment and go, oh, this was an awful film. I don't like her, so I'm going to comment, you know.
It just, I asked this question because, you know, there's things that come along and it's like, well, this is just not going to be my cup of tea, but I'm supposed to, but what is my opinion based on then? If somebody wanted me to write a review on this thing and it's like, well, this is just clearly not a film made for me. Like, let's say give an example, like Twilight, right? There's millions and millions of people who loved it, but it's just something for me. It's just not for me, right? The subject matter is just not for me. But if I was forced to watch it or review it, then what would I be reviewing it on, knowing that inherently this is just not going to work for me?
I don't think the intention should ever be that you know inherently it's not going to work for you. I think what it should be is if you are in a situation where you will have to watch it. And I'm saying that because I have seen them because my girlfriend liked them. But if you are in a situation where you do have to watch a film like that, you go into it and you say, all right, surprise me. Show me what I'm wrong about. Show me what people have appealed to it. I think in the general critiquing sense, it is based upon what the audience you're going towards. So for example, if I'm reviewing a musical and I don't like musicals, I shouldn't be there. Yeah, it should be my field of expertise whereby I can say this is good or this is bad based on my knowledge of this, based on this, based on that. But speaking of Twilight, which is a sentence that I never ever thought I'd utter, I wanted to mention about how crazily successful both the two leads in that film, Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, have managed to transition away from it. Because they are set for life. They've got their Twilight money, which I was in a couple of them. Right. You wouldn't see me, but anyway, they were shot here. But they've managed to transition away from the, oh yeah, you guys are the Twilight people, to more so, Robert Pattinson's the fucking Batman now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Good for him. I mean, it's good for him that he was able to get out of that. Well, I mean, not get out of it as a bad thing, but just diversify himself from that. Now, Kristen Stewart, I don't watch a whole lot of stuff with her, but she definitely has gotten out. They've definitely both gotten out of that.
Yeah, they both moved into the indie world more. I know Kristen Stewart was more in it beforehand. Well, not that much more because she was pretty young when she did Twilight, but they both moved into, like, Kristen Stewart's done Personal Shopper, Robert Pattinson's done a couple of New York films, he's done a space film, all these ones which you would not assume. I guess when you have a young actor that ends up in a role, you assume they're just going to end up doing all these bubblegum things forever because they pay a lot, etc.
Or they get pigeonholed, or they just completely disappear. That's all.
Right.
That's a like that's a big one, right? They just completely fall off the radar, which happens to a lot of. It seems to be happening to a lot of actors and stars these days. Just completely fall off the radar.
But moving on from that, what did you think of the Batman trailer?
It looked really interesting. I like this take on it. It's fascinating with Batman because it's like, where do you go from here with it? You know, especially after the Nolan ones, right? I mean, even the Burton. I mean, even the Tim Burton ones were. I loved it. Then you have the Nolan ones which just put it to another level. But it's just like when it comes to Batman and even these superhero films, it's like, well, what do you do now, right? It's like, do we just keep doing it where just kind of reimagining it, revisioning it every time, and just hope that and just see, there's a new take on it will be fresh. I hope so, because like I said, there's no bigger Batman fan out there than me.
I know a couple.
I love Batman, so I'm really, really. I mean, when this comes out, I'll be there definitely. And there's nothing in there, and then there's nothing in that trailer that I see that I rejected. I'm like, okay, this seems this seems pretty interesting.
I mean, it takes the DC world in a direction that I like.
Right.
I like dark superhero films. I like those ones. I haven't watched much of the Marvel stuff, I'll be honest, but I really like the Nolan trilogy, and I think that it would have been very hard to go from what Nolan did to do another Batman film, and it looks like it might be being achieved.
It looks like it, because I've met Matt Reeves. I've seen some.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I was a soldier on Planet of the Apes.
Oh, he did Planet of the Apes.
Yeah,
okay.
the what was the last one? What was the last one called? The Rise
War,
of the
was it?
War for the Planet of the Apes. Yeah. Did he do Rise? Well, and I've seen what he done with it, because it's actually pretty interesting, because for me, I watched the first Planet of the Apes and I was just like, oh my God. Like I just I didn't like it. And I just watched it, and then I watched the second one, and I think, yeah, the second.
You mean the first or the first new one?
Not the Tim. How do I explain the first? Because we have the Tim Burton one, right? But then the one that came after that, with what's his name, James Franco.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that was just called Planet of the Apes, right? Or was it right?
I don't quite know the trilogy or quadrilogy or whatever it happens to be.
Hold on, let's look it up here.
But I did like the newer versions. I did enjoy those.
The first one that came out. So okay, what was it? Okay, yeah. So it was that first one that came out. I didn't care for it, and it was just. I just really didn't care for it. But then for some reason, I sat down and I watched Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, right? Not really knowing what was going to happen, who was doing it. And I was just like watching it. And I'm like, this one seems different. And I just remember vividly watching it. And I'm like, seeing how it was flowing. It was like, clearly this one had a fresh interest. Even the way the camera was moving, I could just tell this was being done by somebody different. It seemed fresh. It seemed really interesting. It seemed well thought out, right? And I was really engaged in it. And then I was an extra on the War for the Planet of the Apes, so I got to actually see him up close, working and doing his thing. So I'm like, okay, this guy seems like he's pretty competent with it. And I watched the film, and it was a pretty competent film. So, knowing that he was the director and writer of it, I'm like, okay, well, this might be something that it's going to turn out really well, because I think they have a competent person working on it.
I just love I love the aesthetic of it. I love the ultra violence of Batman when he's dealing with one of the guys in the scene. I love the Nirvana song that played. Right.
Yeah,
I just thought it was
and that Batmobile.
Yeah, it just looked so well done.
The thing is, I just didn't even know who the main villain was, though, until I had to read it up.
Again, it doesn't matter.
I think it's the Riddler, actually, because I couldn't really tell who it was, right? But I was like, still, it looks really good. It looks really interesting. Yeah, the Riddler. It
feels much more along sort of a sidestep of the Nolan ones, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, this is gonna be it's PG-13, right? Or is it rated R?
I hope it's R.
This is what I'm wondering. It's like, is this a hard R movie? Because that'll be the first.
I really hope so.
This would be the first. Because if they're doing this, because I would think that would be the greatest take on this if they did what they did for the Joker, and they did it with this, where it's just a gritty, violent Batman.
There are no specific things with anything like a rating because, of course, it's not complete yet.
I'm wondering.
But from what it looks like it, and I mean, look, you got Paul Dano in it, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Paul Dano, Colin Farrell, Andy Serkis, Peter Sarsgaard, John Turturro, Jeffrey Wright. Yeah, no, this is going to be good.
Yeah, it looks really interesting. I can't wait to see another trailer from it.
I would be very surprised if it's not up to par. 2021, The Batman.
So
And on that note,
you're gonna still see the Tenet. You're gonna wait for.
we'll talk about that in the next one.
All right.
On that note, thank you for listening.
It's been a pleasure.
If you skimmed through it,
thanks for watching.
You missed a lot.
And until next time, folks, stay safe out there.
Keep it tuned to Broken English Films and everything we do. There's a lot coming. If you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. And it'll be underrated like Stardust and Blade Runner 2049.
And Equilibrium.
Go
watch that.
And Roadhouse. Watch Roadhouse. It's on Netflix right now.
After Equilibrium.
You're quarantined, you got no choice.
All right, folks. Adios.
Hasta luego.